Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. The turnaround is one of the most common and most important chord progressions in jazz. And you really want to be familiar with how to improvise over this if you want to play pretty much any jazz standard, and especially songs that are based on the rhythm changes. In this video, I'm going to go over a basic set of chords and then in one position cover a set of scales and a set of arpeggios, so you can use that to improvise over this progression. And then I'm going to talk about how you can make lines over the chords using target notes. For me, using target notes was a huge help in learning how to play some solid, clear lines over chord changes. And that really put me on the road from rhythm changes all the way up to playing difficult progressions like giant steps. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, improve the way that you solo, and check out some interesting voicings and arpeggios, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. Let's first have a look at how to play the chords of a B-flat major turnaround. As you can see, I'm using altered dominance on the G7 and on the F7. So that means that I have the tonic, B-flat major 7, and then G7 altered, and then C minor 7, and then F7 altered. And the first thing we're going to look at is just some scales, so we have some notes that we can use over these different chords. And I'm going to do that in the 6th position because that's sort of a very easy place to start with a B-flat major progression. After the scales, I'm going to talk a little bit about some arpeggios for each of the chords, and then I'm going to go into how you can combine all of this when you want to improvise over the chord progression. For the B-flat major 7 and for the C minor 7, we can actually use the same scale, which is basically just a B-flat major scale, and I'm going to do that in the 6th position, so that would be this scale. For the G7 altered, so G7 altered is the same as A-flat melodic minor, and around this position that could be something like this. And the F7 altered, so F7 altered would be the same as G-flat melodic minor, and in this position that could be this scale. Now that we have the scales, we can look for some arpeggios for each of the chords, because it's of course not enough to just have the scales. We do also need to have some arpeggios that are going to be sort of the notes that are really connecting to the chord that we're improvising over. So in the case of the B-flat major 7 and the C minor 7, then we can just use diatonic arpeggios within the B-flat major scale. So for the B-flat major 7, then that could be this arpeggio. And for C minor 7, that could be this one. When it comes to the altered dominance, then that's a little bit more tricky, because if we look at the G7 altered, so that's the same as A-flat melodic minor, and on the G in A-flat melodic minor, we don't actually have a G7 chord, we have a G half diminished chord. But if we look at a G7 altered chord voicing like this one, which is fairly common, so that's a G7 with a flat 13 and a flat 9. Now if I take away the G, then we actually have an F half diminished. And that means that we can use that arpeggio to improvise over the G7 and then also have something that really connects with sort of the altered dominant sound. So that would be this arpeggio. And we can of course do exactly the same with the F7, and then we're going to come out with an E-flat minor 7 flat 5, and that would be this arpeggio. You can of course practice these arpeggios separately and then get them into your fingers and get used to playing them, but it's also useful to just practice them on the progression. And there are several ways you can do that. One good way is sort of using the Barry Harris exercise. So I'm just going to play each of the chords from the root of the chord up to the 7th, using the scale that fits with it. And of course you can do this in several octaves and experiment with using this higher octave. Another thing you can do is to do a similar thing but then use the arpeggio. So in this way you're doing some different exercises and you're really also keeping track of what is happening with the chord progression. And I think that's a really useful way to work on chord progressions and also just to work on your arpeggios, because it's a little bit closer to actually improvising. Another more difficult exercise is to try and play it as a never-ending scale exercise. So that means that I'm just going to be starting on the B-flat and then I'm going to play in the scale, and once I've played a bar of 8 notes, I'm going to change to the G7 altered scale and then take that through the progression. That would be something like this. of course you can do the same with the arpeggios. And so on and so forth. For this turnaround, I've picked some target notes that are sort of really clear so that it's easy to hear when the chords are changing if you target those notes. And that means that for the B flat, I'm using the 5th and the 3rd. For the G7, I'm using the flat 9 and the 3rd. For the C minor, I'm using again the 5th and the 3rd. And for the F7, also again the flat 9 and the 3rd. Most of the time when you're picking target notes, especially when you're just learning a progression, it's really useful to pick a note that wasn't in the previous chord, or at least wasn't a strong note in the previous chord, because in that way you can easily hear when the chords are changing, and you're going to be much more used to hearing how you're playing towards the chord change. An example of a line using these target notes would sound something like this. With this example, you should notice how I'm actually using the target notes. So I'm playing the F in the beginning on the B flat, and then the A flat on the G7, and then on the C minor is a G, and on the F is the A. And the way that I'm making the lines, so I'm in part really just using the arpeggios, like I'm using the F half diminished arpeggio on the G7, and the E flat minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio on the F7. And I'm also using sort of these combinations of arpeggios and scales, because really when you're improvising, you don't want to play only arpeggios or only scales. You want to come up with lines that are a mix of the two, and that will give you sort of the most interesting sounding melodies. If you want to check out how to play chord solos on a turnaround, then go watch this video where I'm going over some exercises and giving you some material and talking about how you can put that to use when you're playing a chord solo on a turnaround in F major. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. These are the kind of videos that I publish here every week. And of course, if you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.